Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Good evening and welcome to Single Shot at Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Roundtable. Tonight we're going to be talking about my personally favorite subject of photography. As a show we embrace and revere all kinds of photography, but as a photographer I always have thing for landscapes and especially for the photographs of nature. I do believe that it's one of the most complicated things to photograph and one of the most rewarding in the end if you actually get what he was envisioning. And in order to discuss it, we invited one of my personal favorite landscape photographers, Anthony Horth, originally from Australia. Hello, Anthony. Thank you very much for joining us.
So, my absolute pleasure.
Your images of virgin images of nature, especially your images from Australia, caught my eye. As you remember, I was just walking by the street and seen your gallery, and I'm really fascinated by the results and wanted to hear more about how it came about. I know that you started as a fashion photographer and actually achieved quite serious level there. Mm-hmm. So would you like to tell me a little bit about how this transition happened, like where you were and how you ended up with photography of nature?
Well, how it all came about is like most things in life, it was an accident. Trying to find my way, left home at an early age, ripe old age of 15, and wandered around with friends and figured out what to do. Had about 12 jobs in 3 years, from the age of 17 till 18, 19. But you had to earn a living. But what do you know at that age? Not a lot. But I do recall I picked up my stepmother's camera when I was 13 years of age, and I looked through that little rectangle, was a Leica, and I thought, yes, I like this. It contains life. I can shape things through this. And I think that became my obsession. I'm a very obsessive person. My obsession was imagery and shape and light, and then how did that helped me to earn a living, not very well at that ripe old age of a teenager. A couple of mates from mine from England, we met together as you do in a pub at that those teenage years. You're there drinking wine or beer or Bloody Marys, and you're meeting women and thinking, well, these friends of mine from England, they had a camera. So we started talking about photographing girls. That's how it came about. It was like meet girls in the pub. You're 17, 18 years old, and that this is wonderful. But I was actually more in love with the photography than I was the fashion aspect. Mm-hmm. But it grew from there, as I said, an accident. People noticed more what I was doing. I was very self-critical about my imagery. With about 24 months down the road, I fell into the love of that idea of working as an assistant to Australia's top photographer, a gentleman by the name of Geoffrey Lee. Mm-hmm. And he was doing a lot of Vogue work, a lot of fashion department store work. And so I convinced him that I could become his assistant. And he took me under his wing. I worked with him for a good 6 months. He threw me into the darkroom doing E2, E3, E4 color processing, doing black and white printing, getting all that gungy stuff all over your fingers and dissolving all those acid baths and things. And, I was like a pig in mud. I was having so much fun and I was being paid for it.
That's an excellent arrangement.
Finally, he said, you're ready to go out and shoot yourself. Not shoot myself, but to shoot with a camera. So off I went. He was double, triple booked all the time, so he figured I could actually take on some of his jobs. And my first job was to go and photograph a jazz band in a nightclub. I thought this was a nice start. Went on from there, and still with my mates in the pub, we would still meet girls, and I would still like to meet them at like 5 o'clock in the morning and photograph them out in the reeds around Lake Narrabeen, as it was, with a pinstripe cap on or something, doing beautiful black and white pictures with extraordinary grain to it, and triple developing in micro-LX for 8 hours or something, and coming out with extraordinary passionate imagery. The girls loved it, of course, because they got great, portfolio images out of it for their model portfolios.
Huh?
Cut a long story short, 6 months later, I was photographing for Australian Vogue. I was like the ripe old age of 20, I believe. And 6 months after that, after shooting most of the major campaigns in the country, I had the Australian Wool Board. I was shooting for Australian Vogue. Sheila Scotter, who was the editor-in-chief at that time, said, "You're getting on a plane and I'm taking you to Paris." So I thought, yeah, okay. I didn't even have a warm coat. So off I went to Paris, and I'm meeting people like Ube Givenchy, Pierre Cardin, and the famous Paris designers. I think there was one called Ungaro at the time. He just had started. And so I'd stayed in Paris for the first 3 weeks and, actually photographing the designers. It went from one thing to the other very quickly. After that, after Paris, I went on with Sheila to London. She introduced me to English Vogue, and I signed a contract with them. I ended up in Vogue Studios for many years then, and established myself as a very competitive fashion photographer in Europe at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Still loving my photography, loving women, of course, and you know how the story goes. You're your early 20s, and
wow, that's a great gig for that age. Especially if you're a photographer, because back then it actually was by itself a pretty huge incentive for anybody to become friends and anything else with you.
yes,
Nowadays it changed a lot, but back then if you're a photographer, it's almost as good as being an astronaut.
Well, the good thing was that we all, us photographers, all knew each other. We would even assist each other. If one got a better job than the other, I remember a dear friend of mine, Alex Chatelain, we would talk about the various gigs we're shooting. John Bishop, another great photographer friend of mine, we would actually use each other in each other's pictures,
That's great.
We would go to the same restaurants afterwards. We would always at Lacapol at 1 o'clock in the morning, eating our favorite oysters or, drinking good wine. Life was just, wonderful.
A club for selected few.
You're not actually one of us. No, we weren't really that financially orientated. We were just having so much fun.
That's how it works. If you actually feel comfortable financially and doing what you love, what else you can ask
Yeah.
for, right?
Exactly.
But yet, and as I understand, this yet happened a little bit later. You asked for something more, and that more was actually photography of nature. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's actually taking a lot of courage and a lot of understanding of what you really want to do in order to make a transition from something as comfortable and already as established to something completely new and seemingly very risky in terms of actually making a living out of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally different hat to wear. It's like the difference between a band and an orchestra. It's fine art versus commercial art. With my commercial art, from, say, my Vogue bookings or Marie Claire or Elle magazine, no matter what country I was in, you get great commissions from Federated Stores. You're shooting Bloomingdale's, Lord & Taylor, doing great campaigns you're flying off to exotic locations. You are commissioned to shoot a campaign or a cover or an editorial series for German Elle or whatever. You go off to Marrakesh. You're there for a week. How exotic, wonderful.
Absolutely.
But in the end, the images, whether you've got your Vogue cover or whatever, I mean, it's printed, it's got words all over it. It's around for about 4 weeks, and then next month's comes out.
Exactly.
So yours goes under the table, or people wrap fish in it. There was never the satisfaction for me from a photographic point of view that I had a reward for seeing an extraordinary substrate or a large image, whether it's pigment on linen or other variations of printing we're doing now, which is dye sublimation. I'm whereas I say the difference between a band and an orchestra, what I do now is I control my substrate, I control everything about my image, which I had no control of before with working as a fashion photographer. So it's very rewarding. There's a lot of trial and error, and we are but students of life.
Well, that's, on general note, always part of what we're doing, no matter what we do. But if I remember, you was mentioning that fashion photography actually contributed largely into the transition. Actually, the photo shoots that you was doing for fashion photography was where you started to be interested and started to look into nature photography. We're actually approaching the end of our first session, so
wow.
We will get back to it after the short break.
Okay.
Today I will be talking about depth of field, so if you're familiar with the concept you can move on to the next episode. But if you're not, I'm often asked how the aperture works besides just controlling how much light gets into a camera and how light or dark your image is. And in simple words, the larger your opening of the aperture is, the smaller will be distance on which your camera is focused. And if you would photograph something like this branch with the open aperture, you will get the image that is focused only on the certain distance, something like this. But if you close it all the way down and take the same picture, you will get the almost the whole plane, everything like this, to be in focus. And in one case you will get more focused attention of the viewer on a specific part of your photograph. Right, we're back, and we was talking about working on the shoots for fashion photography actually being the beginning of interest in landscape photography and nature photography. So can you tell me a little bit more about how it happened?
Well, Alex, that's another accident in life, where you're often you're in an extraordinary exotic location. You're out there with the hair and makeup van. You've got your stylist. You've got your hairdresser, your makeup artist. So my assistants and I, we're out scouting around, looking at the locations where we're going to put our story together. So we spend a lot of time in prep outside while they're prepping inside, getting the talent ready. We're out, and I'm looking at these extraordinary sunrises and sunsets in various parts of the world, and I started to look at these landscapes and thought, like, this is, I grew up in a very agricultural, horticultural background out in the country, in the countryside in Australia. Yeah. And I realized I absolutely love the flow of water. I love the majesty of mountain ranges. I love trees, the sway, the sound of the wind through the trees, the sound of the water in the ocean. That there's so much happening out there with nature that it's humbling. We take it for granted. Absolutely. But if you spend a little bit more time, it's like night diving with underwater. You just stay there and look for a little while longer at a particular area, and there's things happen. Whether it's a bird, whether it's wildlife, whether it's flowers, whether it's the perfume the perfume of nature.
Really?
It's something that we can always fall in love. So the other woman I fell in love with was Mother Nature.
Well, that's actually a perfect way to put
Yeah.
it. And speaking about those little changes and those little things happening, as I understand, you brought from fashion photography something that you naturally was already predispositioned to have and probably developed to an extreme, your attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably what made your landscapes to be so special. Attention to detail, ability to focus attention of the viewer on a specific detail, and readiness and eagerness to actually work on the photograph in order to reveal these details better.
Mm.
As we discussed before, your approach to colors and details of the water is something you take a pride of and you focus a lot of attention on.
Very much so. Again, it's another obsession. Since I went down the avenues with my printers and various substrates and working, exclusively with digital photography, I found, like contrary to what a lot of other people feel, some photographers these days actually fall in love with the idea, the romance of the history of chemistry. That they think that the reality of true photography is only film. Whereas I'm kind of the opposite. I feel like I believe in photographic technique is something you master. You learn it well and you master it, and then you bend it completely and you throw it away, because then it's just pure psychology. It's the way that it's important that when you're working with people, you understand the person, and that makes a great picture. The same as when it comes to nature. I work with my printers, and we work on a sample basis. We do proofs after proofs after proofs. A lot of my images they're from call it 9 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet. They're big pieces, right down to smaller pieces, but down to 24 inches per se. But then when I actually see the first proofs, I'm looking at it, and especially with our new dye sublimation printing, which is it's a gas form of color that goes directly into aluminum, and when it cools down, the liquid forms the color beneath the metal.
Basically forms the pockets with the paint and the level of plastic.
Correct. Now, but the extraordinary scope there is to particularize certain areas, particularly in reflections, where I've got a landscape and I'm in the Amazon. I'm out there. It was a National Geographic expedition we had the opportunity to be involved with, and I've got either the perfect piece of a mirror river giving a perfect reflection of what the actual scene is above the water. And when I say it's not below the water, but it's the reflection of the water, if you've got the centerpiece being the difference between the water and the sky. At other times, you don't have that perfect mirror reflection. You have a little bit of a ripple or a slight whisper of wind that goes across, and it gives another version of what we're seeing up top. It gives the reflection, but I'll give the reflection along with the image on top. And then that's where it fascinates me. I want to interpret exactly what I see with my feet in that vessel or on the ground or from a helicopter, to give you or give my public a feeling to see exactly what I saw. Now, when I get those first proofs back, it's not the right color. What have I got to do? I've got to actually adjust my parameters, whether it's saturation, whether it's desaturation, whether it's vibrance, whether it's shadow detail, whether it's more detail in the highlights. It gives me the scope to be able to maneuver and give my interpretation of what my reality was to show anybody, which is closer to, I believe, than any printed form of chemistry could ever do.
Wow.
That's a debate.
That's actually one of the biggest debates going on in photography, and one we're paying close attention on this program. How much of modification of reality in photography is actually acceptable, correct, and helpful?
Yes.
My personal understanding that as much as you feel necessary, even if it makes the photograph to have absolutely nothing to do with the original image that was in reality in front of the lens.
Yes.
But there is the plethora of different opinions, ranging from AP standards and National Geographic standards, which says if you're changing it any more than what Enlarger can do, it's already wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm actually on the other end of the spectrum. So what is your belief on it? How much of a change of a photograph is acceptable? I know that you believe that the colors of the photograph can be changed and should be changed in order to reflect what you actually seen in real world.
That's
with
right.
the eyes.
Yeah. There's my benchmark. You've said it exactly. I want it to be exactly as I saw. So that's my reality. Now, what is reality? Is man's greatest quality is imagination. And as an artist, I feel, whether I'm doing that with a camera, whether I'm doing digitally, whether I'm doing it with a calligraphy pen, or whether I'm doing it with a paintbrush
Exactly.
or spray can, rules are meant to be understood, but rules are not meant to be followed necessarily if you're going to come out with a version that mightn't be by the textbook of saying, oh, that's incorrect photographically. But who's to say, you know? I get back to when I opened my first studio in Australia, and I used to have a fellow come around and sell me film from a company called Ilford, which was an English company competitive to Kodak.
Is it still there?
And he would come along, the person who was selling the film, and say to me, oh, I love that image you've got on the wall there, though, but let me tell you what's wrong about it. And he would go ahead and start to tell me. And I thought, well, okay. I didn't want to say, well, that's why you're selling film and I'm taking pictures.
Well, that's actually exactly what I'm basing whether this image should exist or should not. If you start with, I like this image, everything else is really irrelevant.
Yeah, yeah,
That's where it should be. We will be back after the short break.
Yeah, yeah.
And we'll conclude this conversation about reality and photography. Hello. Today's single trick is about using red filter for black and white video work on digital camera. You can use it for digital photography as well, and it would be helpful, but it can do something with video that cannot be replicated by any editing, or it will take a lot of effort to do that. As you know, the whole world can be divided in three basic colors: green, red, and blue. And if you would look at your red channel in Photoshop, it's always the brightest one. So if you start your video and apply red filter to it, your high contrast image with a lot of black and a lot of deep white will be more even and give you twice as many halftones and basically more editing opportunities, more of the actual shadows you can play with. Thank you, and watch us on YouTube. All right, so we have our last small portion left, and what I wanted to actually mention that we touched the subject of painters. I know that you're always talking about Monet when you're talking about your works in a very specific way when you talk about colors.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit about it in this direction?
Well, you know, it came about with a particular, one of my printers I work with, his name's Travis. There was a shot I did, we were up at 6 o'clock in the morning. There was a particular river that I found in northwest Australia in a very old publication. And I took it to the local people up in northwest Australia and said, where is this river? And one particular helicopter pilot said, I know exactly where it is. It's going to be about an hour's flight. And it was called the King George River, up near Wyndham in northwest Australia, very, very remote area of Australia. And it's a winding river looking like a beautiful serpent going through the landscape. But there's a lot of rock there, which is terracotta kind of coloured.
Mm-hmm.
And whilst I was up there doing circuits, when we did this shoot, I was doing it 250 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, circling on the sunrise. Got all my images, very, very happy. We go home, and then I noticed when I'm doing my enlargements, Travis and I were talking about the blueness. I wanted the blueness of the river to really come out. But the edge of the river had like this sediment of terracotta orange around it. And then I thought to myself, like, you know, I remember back with the Impressionists, Monet said, like, to make blue more blue is get rid of the orange. So I said to Travis, let's decrease that orange, because it's just, to me, it's just so unreal. It's not right. I don't like it here. It's not the way I saw it. I want to see the blue. So he said, well, that's exactly what that is. So that is so Monet. That's one of the things that he did. In actual fact, the way he saw colour was the opposites, the one side of the spectrum to the other. If you wanted something to be more blue, we'll to take away the red or the orange. So this is what we did with the image, and then, you know what? I got my blue. And it looked more, in the end then, perfectly as I saw it.
So basically your recipe in this case was to have less of a variety in order to create more precise variety.
Yes.
Oh, this is fascinating. It's really concludes in a way, for me at least, how you should approach the photography of nature. Just focusing on what is important and letting everything else to just float around.
Well, especially to make it look the way I saw it. That's what I want to interpret, to actually give to people to share what I saw.
To share your vision.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Anthony, for sharing your vision
Alex,
in your photos and in this conversation. It was really fascinating.
Absolutely.
And wonderful. We'll see you here again.
I hope so.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.